Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Linda Ercoli, and I'm the interim director of the UCLA Center on Aging. And I just want to thank you all for tuning in to our webinar today. Today we have the opportunity to have a discussion with the distinguished Dr. Dilip Jeste from UC San Diego on the science and nurturing of practical wisdom. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Jeste to you. I've actually known Dr. Jeste myself for about 30 years, and I can't believe how time flies. But he is a distinguished professor of psychiatry and neurosciences at the University of California, San Diego. He is the co-director of the UC San Diego IBM Center on Artificial Intelligence, and also, he is the Senior Associate Dean for Healthy Aging and Senior Care, and the Estelle and Edgar Levi Memorial Chair in Aging, and finally, the director of the Sam and Rose Stein Institute for Research on Aging. So notice the word aging pops up a lot. Dr. Jeste has made his career in a number of areas, in the area of schizophrenia, and also on promoting now lately wisdom in aging and in individuals, and of course research in neuropsychiatric interventions and successful aging. So without much further ado, I just want to welcome Dr. Jeste, and thank you for being here today. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. It's my privilege to have known you for so many years, starting with when you were at UC San Diego. And UCLA is actually one of my favorite places. Many friends and colleagues. It's almost like my second academic home.
Yeah, you know, that's really nice to hear, and it's an honor to be here with you today. You actually were, I think, the person who introduced me to geriatric psychiatry when I didn't know that I was going to go into geriatrics. And I published my first paper with you. I don't know if you know that. It's a trivia on geriatric depression. So, right. So there you have it. And it feels like we're coming full circle today. At least maybe 5/6 of the circle. It's great to have you here today to talk about your book, which has just been deemed by the Big Idea Club of one of the most 8 must-read books of this winter, and that's the book Wiser, right here. I'm just going to show people, and this is a book on the scientific roots of wisdom, compassion, and what makes us good. So, very excited to talk about this today, and I know you have a slide presentation, a short presentation for us, and however you want to proceed from here, have at it.
Sure. So I will start with just a few slides, and then we will have our conversation. The reason for having these slides is just to share the main points to make. So we will have a quick look at them. Let me see. Yes. Okay, so I have 9 slides, and so it shouldn't take too long. So some years ago, we at UC San Diego did a study to find out what happens with aging to physical health and mental health. So we studied a sample of 1,500 people from age 20 to 100, okay? So the horizontal axis shows age from 20 to 100, and the vertical axis shows high level of functioning. So this is the physical health. What you see is that in the 20s and 30s, the physical health is at its best. That's the fountain of youth, right? Mm-hmm. And then slowly it starts declining, and especially after age 60, it starts declining faster. This is what we expect. This is what we know, not a surprise. What about mental well-being? It goes exactly in the opposite direction. The fountain of youth, 20s and 30s, are also the fountain of anxiety, stress, depression, peer pressure, competition. The good news is that you start feeling better as you get older. The stress doesn't go down, but how we respond to stress improves. And the question I had was, is that wisdom? So, what is wisdom? Wisdom is a personality trait. It's a personality trait like resilience, optimism, or neuroticism, conscientiousness. But it has different components. And what are those components? The most important component is empathy and compassion. Empathy means understanding somebody's emotions. Compassion means acting on those emotions, where you go out and help another person. Second important component is emotional regulation, the control over our emotions. The third is self-reflection, ability to look inwards, try to understand our own behavior. Then comes accepting uncertainty and diversity of perspectives. So I may have strong values about something, but I can understand why somebody else may have different values. I don't have to agree with that person, but I can respect this difference in opinion. It doesn't mean that one of us is either evil or dumb. At the same time, I cannot sit on the fence all the time saying there is uncertainty and diversity. I have to be decisive when needed. And then finally, spirituality, which is different from religiosity. So an atheist can be spiritual person. Spirituality means constant connectedness with someone or something, whether it is God, whether it is consciousness, soul, nature, whatever you call it. The next question was then, how do you measure wisdom? Can you measure wisdom? And the answer is yes. There are several scales that people have reported. We developed a new scale called San Diego Wisdom Scale, or SDWISE. It has 28 items, and each is to be rated on a 1 to 5 scale, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. These are the examples of the items. One item is, it is important that I understand the reasons for my action. So here we are looking at self-reflection. Another is, I have trouble thinking clearly when I'm upset. So this is opposite of emotional regulation. So we have 20 such items, and you rate yourself. And this scale is available in our book as well as on the website, aging.ucsd.edu. You can take the scale, complete it as honestly as you can, and you'll get a score on each of the components of wisdom as well as the total score. All personality traits are partly based in the brain. And I don't want to go into details at this time. If there are questions, I will be happy to answer those. But basically, we have shown that the main regions of the brain that are involved in wisdom overall, as well as in different components of wisdom, like empathy and compassion, are prefrontal cortex and amygdala. Okay, and within prefrontal cortex, there is dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex. And then amygdala is a part of the limbic striatum. I want to talk about wisdom and aging. I know everybody in the audience is interested in aging. And there is evidence to suggest that wisdom and specific components of wisdom do increase with aging. But it is something more than that. It has an evolutionary value. There is something called grandmother hypothesis of wisdom. What is this hypothesis? The origin comes from the Darwin's hypothesis of survival of the fittest. What Darwin said was that animals don't live once they lose their fertility. And you see that in the wild world. Most vertebrates, all these lions, tigers, elephants, and what have you, they die soon after they lose fertility because they are no longer helping the species survival by procreating and creating children. However, that doesn't apply to humans. We have our age of menopause around 45, 50 in women. Men have something similar called andropause, same age, 45, 50. So if we live to age 90, okay, we would have spent half of our lifespan without contributing to the species survival because we don't produce children. So why do we live that long? That doesn't make sense from the Darwin's hypothesis, right? This grandmother hypothesis states that humans, older humans, contribute to the species survival by transferring wisdom to their offspring and communicating ecological and cultural knowledge, and they help increase the younger individual's survival. And these are some fantastic studies that have been done in dolphins, whales, birds, and humans. These are the papers published in the highest journals in science, journals like Nature and Science. These studies show that when grandma, GM, helps her adult daughter, D, raise children, this adult daughter, D, lives longer, is happier, and produces more children than the grandma did. And all three generations, grandma, this daughter D, and the children, grandchildren, they all become happier, healthier, and live longer. So older people are necessary for the society's survival because they're helping the younger generation be happier, live longer, and even be more fertile. Can we become wiser? And the answer is absolutely yes. How is that possible? Most traits are about 50% inherited. That means 50% of a trait is affected by environment and behavior. That means you can modify that trait. Traits are modifiable to some extent. And we know that wisdom may increase with aging, it may increase with experience. And there are actually randomized controlled trials of behavioral or psychosocial interventions that have tried to improve empathy or compassion, emotional regulation, and spirituality. And half of these trials show that you can improve this component significantly. What I'm going to talk, actually, we want to focus more today in my conversation with Linda will be practical wisdom. What can we do in our everyday life? How? And that means developing a habit of making wise decisions in daily life. So that is talking about individual wisdom. But what is there something like societal wisdom? If you think about today's society, and this is going on for the last 20 years, the society has increasingly become highly stressed, lonely. Loneliness has become twice as common today than it was 20 years ago. Highly polarized, we know that, right? Anxious, depressed. Rates of suicide have increased by 33% in the last 20 years. Deaths from opioid use have increased six-fold in the last 20 years. So there is something happening. So this is what I call the modern pandemic of loneliness, suicide, and opioid-related deaths of despair. When we talk about a pandemic like COVID, but there also have been pandemics of influenza, smallpox, cholera. What we did was we controlled them by developing vaccines, right? And we will soon have, implemented the use of these multiple vaccines for COVID that are coming out. What do we do about this behavioral pandemic? We need a behavioral vaccine, and that behavioral vaccine is wisdom. And that needs to happen both at individual level and societal wisdom level. I do think there is something called societal wisdom that today the societal wisdom is at a pretty low level and we need to increase it. And how can we increase it? By teaching wisdom at all levels. That means teaching compassion, self-reflection, acceptance of diversity, we need to start teaching from kindergarten to 12th grade to undergraduates, business schools, and God forbid, politicians too. I mean, just think if we had all wise politicians and leaders, society would be in a great shape. And so that's the focus of our book, Wiser, that Linda mentioned. And this is my last slide, that if we do this, we can transform today's lonely, distressed, and polarized world into a happier, healthier, and wiser society. So let me stop my slides here, and I will stop sharing the screen, and then.
Actually, Dr. Jeste, can you go back to the components?
Sure.
Just so people can get another look at that. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think this is like very, very important. What one message that I got from reading the book is that we can work on each of these. Is that not true? To enhance our wisdom.
That's exactly right. We can work on each and every one of those. And we all have strengths and limitations. We all are strong in some of those elements and not strong in others. And so those are the ones we can focus on for each of us individually.
What made you think about wisdom as a focus?
Should I stop?
Oh, sorry. What made you think about wisdom as a topic? How did you get interested in wisdom?
So I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, as I said. And when I first decided to go into geriatrics, some of the colleagues said, "Why are you doing that? It must be so depressing, because aging is all gloom and doom. Everything goes down, physical health declines, the brain degenerates, and there is so much ageism also in the society. So why study aging?" And I said, that can't be true, because I see people in even the 80s and 90s who are doing very well. And I came from a culture where older people were respected. Most Eastern cultures are like that. And some Western cultures are also like that. Older people are respected. And there is implicit assumption that that wisdom increases with aging. And I said, is that really true? I mean, is that just something that we feel good about? How can we study that scientifically? Because wisdom has been a philosophical and religious construct for centuries. But I wanted to study it from a scientific perspective. So I thought it was important to define it, measure it, see where it is best in the brain, and then see how we can increase it.
And I was really struck by the way you went about doing this. If you can share a little bit about your initial work on, defining the components of wisdom. Though what you show on that wheel aren't necessarily something that presented themselves to you, right? Just obviously.
That's absolutely correct. So when we started doing research on wisdom, the first question was exactly as you said, how do you define wisdom? And whenever I do research on anything, the first thing I do is to review the literature and find out what people have done and said. So literature on wisdom, in a way, goes back to ancient times. It goes back to the scriptures. Bible has, I think, 12 books of wisdom, including Book of Job, for example. Every religion talks about wisdom. So I looked at wisdom in a scientific manner in one of the Indian scriptures and looked at the components of wisdom. And we made a list of those components. But then I said, that is the ancient construct. What about today's modern concept? So the empirical research on wisdom started in the 1970s in the Max Planck Institute in Berlin and University of Southern California in Los Angeles. But since then, the empirical research on wisdom has been growing. So we wanted to find out what are the common elements of the definition of wisdom used by these different researchers. And the 6 that I presented here are the ones that are most common to these various definitions, and they're also common to the scriptures. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that most of the religions do talk about empathy and compassion, right? They talk about emotional regulation. They talk about accepting diversity and uncertainty. They talk about humility, self-reflection. So should not come as a shock. And yet, it was really great to show that there are empirical data that support this definition.
Mhm. And I was very impressed also in the number of ancient texts that you actually consulted or studied. So to me, it was like a bit of an anthropological study as much as it was, an empirical psychiatric study in many ways, and historical. So I think that's probably why, it seems to me some of the things that are in the book they're profound, but they also like really resonate with the reader. At least they did with me. The elements that you're talking about and how to nurture those sides of us to gain wisdom. It's a different type of education about ourselves.
That's a very good point, and that's what actually I started thinking about this. That when I think about how we raise our children, how good parents raise our children, right? What do we do? One thing we do is when the toddlers start throwing temper tantrums, we say, don't get upset every time you don't get something. You have to control your emotions. Don't throw temper tantrums. Take it peacefully, right? So we are teaching emotional regulation. Then we teach the kid about sharing the toys. Don't be selfish. Share the toy with your sibling. Share with your neighbors. Share with other kids who don't have it. We are teaching empathy and compassion, right? Then one day our child comes home and the grades show that he didn't do well in math. And the child says, well, my math teacher really doesn't like me. And you say, no, it may be because you didn't study math. You were doing something else on that day, the day before the exam. And so think about it, why you may not have done well, because you can then improve next time. So we are teaching self-reflection. So if you think about that, actually, this makes so much sense, these components. We try to teach our kids without realizing that these are the things we are teaching. But this is what a good parent does, what a good teacher does, a good mentor does.
Would you say that young people though have wisdom?
I think what happens is there is a wide variation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and wisdom is not something categorical in the sense it is not that there are some people have wisdom and some people don't. It is a question of how much wisdom everybody has, right? And within wisdom, then there are these different components. So how much of each of them everybody has? What we see is that even in children, sometimes you see kids who really are quite wise for their age,
Mm-hmm.
and there are others who are not. You and I had talked about that marshmallow experiment, this one marshmallow, and some kids couldn't wait to swallow that, even though they knew they would have gotten a second marshmallow if they had waited. So there are some kids who have the emotional regulation, they can control their emotions. And so you do see kids who are wise for their age. At the same time, wisdom does increase with aging because of experience. At a young age, you don't have the experience. But as you go through life, have a lot of adverse as well as positive influences that makes you control your emotions better. That makes you more self-reflective, compassionate, and so on.
Mm-hmm. What types of things though could thwart that growth and development of wisdom in a child?
I think one is good teaching. I think because the kids are looking at older people as role models,
Mm-hmm.
not only in what they say, but how they behave. So we can't just preach, we must practice what we do, right? What preach. And there, the parents and teachers play an important role. The grandparents play a very important role. I talked about their grandmother hypothesis of wisdom, and there are studies that show that when grandparents are involved in raising grandchildren, both generations are helped. The kids really are helped a lot because they have these role models of older, wiser people who control, they give good advice, they are very affectionate, right? So that is what helps children become wiser.
Yeah, it makes me think of people who grow up in intergenerational households, which, are becoming, well, it depends. I mean, some societies, people are moving in together, some communities, some communities, they're more nuclear family, but it does make me wonder about the difference in the kids from one environment to the next.
Exactly, exactly. And there are studies that have shown, actually large scale studies, that children in whose upbringing grandparents were involved, when those children grew up, they were less likely to have behavior problems or some of these impulse control disorder or problems at school, even problems with law. So really these things have long-term, long-lasting influence on the rest of the life.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I was raised in an extended family with my grandparents, and I do wonder if on some level it was part of me going into geriatrics. Not so much, but because of, people say, well, I'm in geriatrics because I love old people. I don't not love old people, but I never thought about it as you love old people or you don't love old people. They are my people. They are my family. I'm comfortable around older people. And now I'm becoming one of those, older persons. But I think, being in a household where I both sets of my grandparents lived very close by and they helped raise me. They were, very instrumental in that. I think gives you a different sense of the value of older adults, and also the respect, like I better do what they say kind of respect. So they weren't seen as novel to me so much as part of the family. But I think that really influences how people, um, interact with and think about aging, and looking at somebody as an older human being, not just an old person, right? And in our business, we work with older people all the time. We know that they're just like young people, except they have maybe more health problems. So I definitely it resonates with me about the grandparent hypothesis.
Yeah, I know that that's a very well made point. And there are, again, studies have shown that. There is a study called Experience Score
Mm-hmm.
that was done at Hopkins, but I know UCLA, Dr. Seaman and colleagues were actively involved in that. Great study in which it's funded by MacArthur Foundation. What they did was they took some older adults who had retired from their jobs, people over the age of 65. And this was a randomized control trial. So they chose some people to spend at least 15 hours a week for one full year in a public elementary school. Okay. And the other group didn't do that. And they looked at both the children who did that and the older people before and after. What they found after 1 year was that the children who were helped by these older adults in the community, their grades went through the roof. The kids were very happy. Importantly, the older adults, they were not only happier, but their biomarkers of stress and aging improved. And this is the most interesting. The volume of hippocampus on the brain MRI in this group that worked with these kids was larger than in the group that was control group, which didn't work. Now, that doesn't mean volume of hippocampus increased with this. What it meant is the volume of hippocampus did not decline with age in these
Mm,
people
okay.
because of the time and effort they were spending working with the kids.
Right. And so for those of you who don't know, can you explain what a biomarker is for people who may not be familiar with that term?
Sure, sure. So we all know that stress is bad, not just for our mind, it's bad for our body. We all know that when we are stressed out, we are more likely to have infections, for example. And almost any disease can be made worse by stress. How does that happen? Because stress has biological effects. And how can we measure those biological effects? There are some things that we can measure in the blood, urine, and in other parts of the brain, but saliva, for example. But blood is sort of the easiest way to do that. So you draw the blood and you can measure some things that are indicative of inflammation, immune function, oxidative stress, and so on. Similarly, so these are called biomarkers. In this sense, they are biological markers of stress. There are also biological markers of aging. And so this is a way, again, none of them is perfect. However, by looking at several of them, you can understand where the biology and stress level are going.
So, which makes me think about, and somebody asked this question, since we're talking about intergeneral relationships, and since we're talking about loneliness and stress, one of our viewers today is asking about, are there any other kinds of living arrangements for older adults that can help mitigate the pandemic of loneliness?
It's a great question. That's the type of research that is needed. And hopefully, the years to come, we will be doing some randomized controlled trials of this kind. However, already there is evidence to suggest some things. One basic answer, though, is that it is very individualized. So there is no one solution that would fit all, right? So different people are different. We have different needs. And so we need to find out what suits us well. Moving into a retirement community, for example, uh, independent living, assisted living, whatever is needed, it helps in several ways. That there you're not alone. You're surrounded by people. Also, your health is well taken care of because somebody's watching you. They can make sure that you get your medications, you have food, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, you're going into a new environment and you'll be living with people you didn't know before. And so, on the one hand, you have opportunities for doing more things. On the other hand, it can produce stress for some people who are not used to living with strangers. So, like anything, there are pluses and minuses. There are also financial considerations.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these communities are expensive. At the same time, on the other hand, by going into a community, we save a lot of expenses that we have at home. So if we live at home, we have to pay, of course, the home insurance. Anything goes wrong with the home, we have to fix it. So that is stress. That produces stress. Whereas here, everything is taken care of. You don't have to worry about it. So, as I said, everything has pros and cons. And in a way, it's the wise decision making, bringing wisdom into the play. So, what we need to do is one is self reflection. Think about what we like and don't like. These pros and cons, which is more important? Is living with strangers okay? Or is the fact that you have number of opportunities for socialize, is that something you value, right? So self-reflection is one. Second is emotional regulation. Just control your emotions. You're not going to find a solution to the problem immediately, right? So let's be calm. Don't expect something. Don't get upset if you meet somebody you don't like, etc. Empathy, compassion, including self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Whatever decision you make, it may or may not work out in the short term. That's okay. Be compassionate to others. They are also like you, so on and so forth. And think about especially the alternative perspectives, pros and cons, and then think about what would work best for you. So the answer to your question is really find out what works well for you. And you can do that by talking to lots of people, getting their feedback, but you make the decision.
Right. I think people are afraid of making mistake. These are things that people have told me, like patients have told me. trying to make these decisions?
One thing I find useful in that respect, don't feel that this is your life and death decision. Most decisions, you can reverse them. I've seen people who move into those retirement communities and after some time they move out.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that pressure, I find immense pressure is very stressful. That you feel that you have to make a decision that you cannot change, that is very stressful. On the other hand, if you think this is the decision I'm making for the next couple of years, and I can change it, that makes it much easier to handle.
Yeah, the finality of things sometimes can be very frightening, or the cognitive types of things that people tell themselves, like this, I'm going to die here, which I hear a lot. I'm going to die in this place if I go. And all these kind of situations, where it's like, if that's the mentality that you have, either you're not going to make a decision or you're going to go in there and maybe fulfill the prophecy that you're talking about for yourself. So I think what you talked about was being open-minded and in Wiser, and how important that is. And
Exactly.
and when I was reading Wiser, I thought of many things for myself, and I thought of things for my patients, because many of the things that you're discussing, like loneliness, lack of self-compassion, these are things that people carry with, either they've been lonely all their life, some people, or they don't know how to be compassionate towards themselves, very hard on themselves. And I would imagine, but you tell me, like, if you don't have self-compassion, how can a person be compassionate towards another person?
Exactly. Self-compassion is very important. One common example I give is, we are sitting in the plane is about to take off, and the security video shows up. And it says that if the air pressure drops, the mask will come down. Put on your own mask first before helping the person sitting next to you, whether it's a child, disabled person, doesn't matter. Now, that may seem selfish. How can I put on my mask first before helping my child or disabled parent on the other side? Well, if you don't help yourself first, you won't be able to help more people. And that's the thing, that you have to help yourself. Too much compassion is not good. So, although these different components of wisdom that I mentioned, they're useful, too much of any of them is bad actually. So, too much because if you have too much compassion and no self-compassion, you'll give everything away. You won't survive. Then how can you help others? It is better that you take care of yourself. Then you are there to help your parents, your children, grandparents, and other people.
Right, it's a balance, and I think what I'm getting too from reading the beginning of the book towards the end is you go from the individual to societal, and it seems like you talk about how if you have more societal wisdom and compassion, then is the individual as wise. But I think what I hear is you have to have a balance,
Exactly.
components.
Exactly. Wisdom is, you hit the nail on its head. That's exactly right. Wisdom is balance. I frequently quote this serenity prayer
Mm-hmm.
that
Thinking of
um,
that. Yep.
God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And I really think in older age, this is important guide to wisdom. So at age as we get older, we cannot do physically the thing that we could do when we were in our 20s, when we could move so fast, learn new technologies, new other things very quickly, and so on and so forth. But we still can do lots of other things. So, and that's what you see actually in the society. Famous football players, as they get older, they become coaches, they become TV announcers. Um, and you can actually give your wisdom to others, which comes with experience. On the Silicon Valley, and the people who develop this, the billionaires who develop this new technology, they're often in their 20s. However, the smart ones, they hire CFOs who are older, the chief financial officers who are older and who then can know how to manage a business, expand it, work with people. So there are things that older people can do that younger people cannot because younger people don't have the experience. And studies have shown again that older, with age, I think most of us in the audience will agree that as we have become older, we have become more self-reflective. We have become more compassionate to others. We have more control over our emotions. We are more likely to accept diversity of perspectives, right? So those things do come with age and experience, and young people don't have that. So we can help the younger generation through that.
Another thing that I've noticed, and I think a lot of people get stuck when they're having this problem, kind of transitioning from, what they did when they were 20, 30, 40, 50 to what they can do after 60, 70, 80, and they get stuck. And so you have individuals who maybe they live at home, but they can't think of anything to do. Or maybe they live in an assisted living environment, but they don't come out and do the activities. And how can we, or how can a person have, develop that courage to explore new things to do to gain more self-compassion, because basically they've kind of given up on themselves? What would you tell somebody who had that situation if he were your patient or she were your patient?
No, that's a good point, and yeah, I do see people like that.
Yeah.
I think an important thing one needs to have is purpose in life, meaning in life. And what happens is that when we are young, there is a clear purpose, some ways. Sort of you have to finish education, then you take a job, raise a family, and then, of course, we get involved in our work. And then when the time comes for retirement, and in older age, so suddenly you lose the job, and also the physical health is declining. You see other people dying, including those close to you, and we start questioning, what are we here for? What are we contributing? Nobody wants us. That's the feeling. But that's not true. We can still do a whole lot. The society needs older people. As I said, this grandmother hypothesis of wisdom, these intergenerational studies, time and again they have shown that older people bring wisdom which is needed for the younger generation. So what we need to do is find a purpose for ourselves. And that purpose would vary from person to person. So some people, and again, if we can take some role model example. So I have seen in academics, for example, some people, researchers who retired, they continued doing research, but they switched the area of research. So instead of one, they started doing something because that was something new to them. And yet they could do that. Some teachers, they started learning a new language. Or people who used to be good musicians when they were young, but then couldn't really do much music because of their job. They started going back to their old musical buddies or learning a new instrument. So you can find a purpose for yourself. There's always something you can find. And you can change that. You try something out for a year, doesn't work out, take another one. But there are things we can do. Just finding the purpose and then devoting attention and effort to that. We can do it. Everybody can do it.
And you talked a lot in the book, or a good amount, about volunteering.
Right. Yeah, volunteering is incredibly helpful. There was a Japanese physician. He was probably the oldest surviving physician. I mean, he died recently at the age of 108, I think. So around the age of 75, he stopped seeing patients. So he stopped. But then he started community service. And he started writing books for other people. He started working in some school for nursing. And so he became a community advocate and community worker. And he found that incredibly helpful to him. He was so busy. He said, I have no time. Even at the age of 100, he said, I'm working 18 hours a day. And
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And so what happens is when we do that, we become healthier.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so volunteerism actually is something one can stress really as much as possible.
Time, knowledge. I mean, it's and like you talked about, it's not just money. It's giving your talent, your knowledge, your experience, or your compassion, which is one way that you can help foster the wisdom, right? Is by giving more of that to other people.
Right? And we feel good about ourselves. And somebody comes to you and thanks you for what you had done, that makes the whole day, it makes a day, right? It
Yeah,
makes a month, year, whatever. And so that feeling of gratitude is really so important.
yeah. It's a reward, right? It's a reward.
Right?
Yeah.
And we all need such rewards. These are not necessarily financial rewards, but the emotional rewards that are critical.
Yeah. I think too during the pandemic, what I've noticed, at least for myself, and is it's really been important to get out from within myself and put myself out there more, whether it be to be there more for patients or to, or to do some volunteering. Because if I were, and I'm very fortunate, I can work from home, I have my job, like I have no complaints. But the whole idea of, what's like you talked about, what's going on around you, being fearful of it, you have to kind of get outside yourself. And by giving something, whether it be to talk to a friend who's stressed out or do something more formal, is really helpful.
And even biology supports that.
Hmm.
Studies have shown that compassion, altruism, when you do something for others, that actually it not only reduces stress psychologically, but it stimulates the reward circuitry in the brain. And people who keep themselves active physically, cognitively, socially, there is something called neuroplasticity of aging, that the
Hmm.
brain continues to evolve in older age if you keep it active.
Yeah.
And even new synapses, even new neurons form in specific regions. So this is not just sort of feel good TV science. It's actually based on biology.
Yeah. We could go on all day, but we have quite a few questions, and do you mind? I'm going to try to take them in the order in which they were asked, if possible. Here's one from Terry who says, "Are there different intuitions, such as an intuition that is wise or spiritual, and is that distinct from a hunch?"
It's a very good point. I think it depends on how you define intuition and hunch. But basically, there's no question that different people have sort of different sense or different perspectives. And often the intuition comes from experience, although we may not realize it. That it seems to be coming sort of unconsciously or subconsciously. But actually, it has come because of something we read, something we saw, or we experienced. And intuitions are useful. However, we shouldn't make the decision strictly based on intuition because the intuition can go wrong. So that's where self reflection becomes important. So, just like you said, Linda, about the balance, it is
Yeah.
balance between emotion and cognition. So, it's like we say, what our left brain tells us and right brain tells us, and that. Uh, so, we need to think about what is the right decision from a practical perspective, but also
Mhm.
emotionally, what would be the right one.
And you talk about in the book about the experiment of the kids, right? A kid is given a marshmallow, right? And this researcher leaves a room and says, "If you don't eat this marshmallow while I'm gone, I'm going to come back and give you two." And so you see all different reactions. You see the kid, the minute the door slams, he's eating the right, the marshmallow. Then you have the ones that wait and they fidget and they fidget and then they eat the marshmallow. And then you have the ones that wait, maybe hard, but they wait, and the researcher comes back and they get 2 marshmallows. And I think emotional regulation is about eating the marshmallow. Like, I know for me, whenever I get in trouble, it's usually because I ate the marshmallow. And it's better to kind of try to work through, and you talked about mindfulness in the book, work through your emotions, kind of sit with them. So you don't feel so, I got to act on this now and make a poor decision. So again, I think it's about that balance. Like, maybe somebody's intuition or their gut would tell them, lash out, get mad, say something. So I think you make a point like that. We really have to kind of take a deep breath and think about, am I heavy on the compassion right now? Am I heavy on the impulsivity right now? Somebody asked, it seems to me that very young humans have wisdom that diminishes from socialization or something else.
I think what happens is wisdom is modifiable to some extent. As I said, 50% is inherited, 50% is modifiable. And we do see changes in wisdom as people age. Usually, it increases with age and experience, but that's not always the case. I mean, we see some old people who are very unwise, and we see some young people who are very wise. And what causes wisdom to increase in some people and not in others? I think that varies. Again, it partly genetically determined, partly determined by environment, culture, the context, the people you are working with, and people you live with. So all of those factors affect what happens to the wisdom as you age.
One other person asked, how does your work in artificial intelligence relate to wisdom? And if so, how?
Thank you for asking that question.
Okay.
That's something that has interested me for quite some time. So artificial intelligence started in the 1950s, and it was based on human intelligence, right? That's why it is called artificial intelligence. The idea was to make the computers as intelligent, as smart as possible, smarter than, and actually the AI can do that today. This artificial intelligence, these computers, they can make very complex calculations in no time at all. Something that will take us hundreds of years, they can do that just like it, right? However, what the machines cannot do is to make compassionate decisions, to have to teach emotional regulation to the users, to consider different perspectives. And so the idea behind what I call artificial wisdom. So the future AI or artificial intelligence will be less like intelligence and more like wisdom. Because in humans, intelligence doesn't help too much. You need some intelligence to be wise, but high IQ does not mean high wisdom. We see some very smart people who are very unwise. Some of the psychopaths, some of the terrorists, they have high IQ. IQ is not the problem. They lack wisdom, right? And so that's what we need to do to have our computers and robots of future who can actually help us become more compassionate, more emotionally regulated, and we can teach them. I mean, obviously, the computers will never have the true human emotion. They won't have consciousness or soul, but they can teach the human users how to be more compassionate. That's the idea.
I think that's a really important point, because not everybody does have that compassion. And we were talking about when people raise their children, which relates to another question, is how can you help a parent, especially if they lack this, or maybe they're abusive, how do you help them engender wisdom in their children if maybe they don't have that, they haven't developed those tools yet?
Exactly.
Is there any, is there anything one can do about that?
In future, again, going with this, I see that the robots actually will increasingly have a major role. Currently, the robots, I think they're used in Japan more often than elsewhere
Mhm.
for older people, and they serve as companions. They're like pets. Uh, the but what they do is they help in very specific tasks, like they will remind you to take your medication, and that's good. But the future robots with this kind of wisdom can also be therapists. They can be coaches. And again, that means we will have to teach them. And again, they will never replace the humans. Robots will never replace humans, but they can help us more than what they are doing now. Because again, I mean, coming back to the healthcare, the problem is that we don't have enough healthcare providers.
Mhm.
And the gap between the availability or the gap between the supply and the demand is growing. So we will have to count more and more on technology. So the robots will never replace humans, but they can help some of our work.
I know we only have 3 minutes left, but I see a couple of questions from colleagues. I'm going to try to get them in there. One is from Catherine Mogul, who's here at UCLA. And she says, if grandmother's support for daughter's parenting confers some benefit to the daughter, do we know what the benefits are for the grandchildren?
The studies have shown that the grandchildren also are happier and live longer. Um, the studies have shown also that when grandparents are involved, as these kids get older, they have fewer behavior problems, fewer even psychological problems, including ADHD, for example. And so there's no question that this grandparenting helps not only the adult children, but also their grandchildren.
They're the recipient of much of the wisdom and the nurturing from
Correct.
that, right? Patricia Will asks, the recent Stanford study on ageism was disturbing. It tends to negate the gift of wisdom that comes with older age, as you described it. How do we transmit that older people are indeed wiser to counteract ageism? Great question.
That's a great question. And this is something, yeah, we need to do every single day. This is what AARP is focusing on. I mean, I find so much ageism. Uh, we talked about the silver tsunami. People talk about this increasing number of older people as if that is a disaster. So wrong. I call it golden wave, that we are so lucky that we have this great resource of older and wiser people who will help the younger generation. So we need older people to help younger people. So they are not a burden on the younger people. They are a big resource and help for the younger generations.
Boy, that's so true. I think they call it the silver tsunami because they're thinking about how much money it's going to cost them. Really, when you think about it, I think it's based in economics, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera.
But even economically, they're wrong, because if we keep older people active, their healthcare costs go down, and people will live longer, healthier when they can contribute to the society. So every which way, it's a win-win situation.
We could keep going, but unfortunately, our time is up, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of the questions today, or we aren't. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Obviously, it's a very hot topic, and Dr. Jeste, I just am thrilled that you were able to be here for this webinar and share your wisdom today. And remember that the book is called Wiser, and the book actually goes through ways that people can develop more wisdom. And I think that's what I know. There's a question about that. So it actually goes into detail, and I have to say, it's very digestible, folks. It is very appropriate to daily life, and you'll learn something about brain function as well. So by all means, check out the book. It's one of the 8 must-reads of the winter. And Dr. Jeste, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure and an honor to talk with you. And again, thank you all for the great questions from the audience. And I wish everybody very well.
Okay, thanks so much. And thank you, everyone. Don't forget to check us out at the UCLA Longevity Center. Be well, everyone. Take care.